Testament book of Galatians, chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. Again, listen for the word of the Lord. For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become slaves to one another. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. If, however, you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I love that the Bible has a whole book called Proverbs. It's this book of ideas. It is a search for wisdom. It's not the easiest book to read. It makes you stop and think, and it makes people talk and debate about what the meanings are and what life is all about. It's a book of discernment. It is about the way to wisdom, because the Bible knows that ideas have consequences. Martin Luther was the founder of the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation, by the way, worked in part because there was a change in technology. The printing press had been recently invented, and so Luther's ideas could spread rapidly far and wide, and people found freedom in his ideas. However, ideas have consequences. And some of Luther's ideas about freedom were taken and changed, and in short, they led to a rebellion. The historians call it the Peasants' War. The poor at the time felt oppressed, and some nobles were deeply in debt, so they joined them. What ended up happening were riots and battles ensued. Convents and monasteries and libraries were burned, and thousands of people died. Luther was horrified. He wrote an article entitled "Against the Murderous, Thieving Hordes of Peasants." He condemned the violence as the devil's work and called for the nobles to put down the rebels like rabid dogs. Luther was rarely one for subtlety. My history professor called him a bull in a china shop. After the riots, in many ways, Luther retreated from politics. He developed a dualistic theology that said the state is the state and the church is the church. The state can take care of the church while the church only deals in personal spiritual matters. These ideas perpetuated. And later on, after the culture had been formed for hundreds of years, Adolf Hitler arose in the most Christian nation on earth. And that nation widely, though not completely, did not have the theological wisdom to stand up against the Nazi hatred. Ideas have consequences, and they have trajectories. The second generation of reformers to follow Luther, fortunately, included a much more careful theological thinker, John Calvin, who started the Presbyterian Church. Calvin was not trained initially as a minister, but as a lawyer. He did not interpret the world in dualistic terms. He built a theology that recognized that the world is a complex place. Calvin referred to it like a labyrinth. Like a labyrinth, it takes a lot of careful thinking and faith to find our way through this maze of life. But for Calvin, this world was created by God. And the hand of God can still be seen in this world, and so we are to be involved in this world. Calvin saw life as a divine drama and said that it is up to the people of God to listen for the call of God, to figure out what is going on in the world, to find our way through the maze, and to play our part in this divine drama that is set before us. Calvin's was a world-affirming theology, and that includes the world of politics. A week in Calvin's ministry was not just about preaching, teaching, and pastoral care. Calvin's schedule was likely to include an argument with local merchants over their exorbitant interest rates and unethical business practices, the forming and reforming of schools and a hospital, regulations for nannies, fire regulations for homes and buildings, laws regarding sewage and housing, legal regulations regarding room rent rates, finding and developing a cloth-making industry that was developed in Geneva specifically to provide work for the unemployed. And one of my personal favorites, Calvin pushed the city council to require that houses have railings on balconies to protect the children from falling. Calvin had a world-affirming theology, one where he was involved in the world, including the world of politics. Up until Calvin, the politicians could reform the church, but Calvin's theology turned the tables and said the church could reform the politicians. Ideas have consequences. Calvin taught us to be careful about our ideas. We have to think about how the church should work to reform society. Even today, our Presbyterian Constitution includes among the 6 central goals of the Presbyterian denomination standing up for the truth and working for social righteousness. Those are and always have been part of the central goals of the Presbyterian Church, standing up for truth and working for social righteousness. Presbyterians have always been involved in the world, including the formation of the government of the United States. They were heavily involved in shaping that, and it followed that Presbyterian idea about a balance of power with checks and balances, being accountable to one another. As it is in our denomination, where no one person, whether it be minister or session or presbytery or synod or general assembly, has too much power because we're all sinners. And since we're all sinners, then we're accountable to one another. We're held in check by one another. And so those Presbyterians that helped form our nation influenced the shaping of our nation. So we have a House of Representatives and a Senate and a president and a court system, including the Supreme Court. Nobody has too much power, and there are checks and balances because ideas have consequences. Our beloved nation had a tragic and extremely troubling situation this week. We will be trying to figure out what happened and what led up to this for decades. None of us has all the answers, but that does not relieve us from the duty of trying to do our best to figure out what is going on now. First of all, we need to admit that we have a crisis of truth. We have a crisis of truth, and we are going to have to face that situation. Like the time of Martin Luther, we live with a new technology. For Luther, it was the printing press that could spread ideas far and near. For us, it's the internet with multiple relatively new cable TV shows that call themselves news. It makes it easy to spread conspiracy theories and deception. This is a change, a significant change. Freedom of speech in our country used to mean that ideas could be spoken freely, but they did not disseminate too fast. Ideas, as it were, went through a funnel with multiple sieves on it that would weed out some ideas that were not worthy. That funnel, that sieve, included trusted college professors that we could turn to for wisdom, respected clergy who were steeped in ethical discernment, news journalists who would search out facts and develop journalistic ethics to hold themselves more and more accountable in their reporting, book researchers who would spend months and years hunting down reliable, multiple sources of information before it was ever printed, and great public intellectuals and politicians who themselves were discerning, deep thinkers. They could debate and make decisions. This funnel of truth did not weed out all the bad ideas, but it gave us some basic ideas to debate, conservative and liberal, basic ideas that were the best to debate. We as a nation could largely find some semblance of agreement. We could agree on some core facts. We could find some approximation of truth. And because of all this, we could trust one another and reach agreeable compromise. Now we have the internet with all its platforms and the news channels that are not guided by journalistic ethics, but driven by their owners' ideologies and cynical forces seeking political gain. There is no weeding out of ideas. There are silos, and we tend to live in our silos. There are logarithms that drive people toward people who think alike. Some of the strangest things can be found out there these days. I mean, if you want to believe that the Queen of England is a lizard, you can go online and find a group that will agree with you on that. Let me be very clear. I have great respect for the Queen, and I do not believe she is a lizard. But that is the level of ridiculousness that some people today take to be truth. We have relatively new technologies where lies are spread as truth, and they are shaping people's ideas. And we do not yet have a set of rules to govern these technologies. And so we are having a hard time with truth. And when you have a hard time with truth, you cannot trust one another. It makes people vulnerable to manipulation and extremism. Determining what is the right way to govern these new technologies and set up standards for truth is going to take a long time. But if we are going to survive, we need to become more wise about all of this. Calvin was right. The world is a labyrinth, but God calls us to be moral actors and to find our way through the labyrinth in this divine drama. It is complex, it will take time. It is the responsibility of all of us to become more discerning, more informed, more articulate, more wise. We need to advocate for laws and rules and norms of behavior governing ourselves and these technologies, what we're willing to say and believe, because ideas have consequences and long-term trajectories. We have to come to trust one another again. But for now, we need to say every one of us is responsible for the ideas that we choose to believe and for the actions that we take. Leaders are held to a higher standard of thinking and behavior because people trust them and they put their lives in leaders' hands in many ways. I appreciated the words of Mitt Romney this week, Senator Romney, when he said it very simply but very well. He said, quote, "The best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth. That is the burden and the duty of leadership," end quote. After the election, 62 court cases were filed. Truth is unambiguously evident. The result is that Vice President Biden fairly won the Electoral College vote. By fair and reasonable voting processes, he is the president-elect. The burden of leadership is to tell the truth, and that is the truth. Public officials and public leaders, by their role of office or position, are held to a higher standard of conduct. Those who seek political and financial gain by deceptive statements should be held accountable. What that looks like is not up to me to say, but as a moral leader, it is up to me to say it should be significant. Our country holds the value of peaceable dissent. Going to the nation's capital and gathering for a mass protest, that's part of the way we do things. We raise our voices, we lift up our issues, we point to areas of disagreement publicly, and that's part of who we are, and we should celebrate that. But when a protest turns into a riot, that is wrong. In a riot, morality disappears. This week, the crowd was chanting to hang Vice President Pence because they did not agree with him. And that is morally wrong. One rioter in the House chamber with zip ties that police use for handcuffs was there as a clear threat to kidnap our lawmakers. And that is morally wrong. It seems that it is not just about our lawmakers protecting us. We need to protect our lawmakers and our laws. We need to stand up for the truth and for accountability. The assault on our Capitol building, the senators, the House of Representatives, their staff, the Capitol Police, it was appalling, immoral, illegal, and wrong. And those who stoked the fires that led to this situation should be held accountable. You cannot yell fire in a crowded theater. It is wrong to incite a large group of people to violence. Inciting violence and participating in this kind of violence is morally wrong. The ideas that led these people led to the deaths of a police officer and multiple others. It shows what happens because ideas have consequences, and some ideas have deadly consequences. A mob has no conscience. And there were those who brought weapons, including pipe bombs, to this event this week in our Capitol building, and could easily have been far, far worse. If we are to take the assault on our democracy seriously, those who provoked this violence and those who participated in the violence need to be held accountable. And we need to peaceably, calmly insist on clear, serious consequences. For if people think there is no price to pay for threatening our system of democracy, they will do it again. And remember, the governor of our neighboring state, Michigan, was threatened with kidnapping less than 2 months ago. And there are threats even today for more violence in the future. We need to clearly stand up against this. There's a traditional Presbyterian prayer that I heard time and time again growing up every week from the lips of my pastor when he prayed, "Order the unruly powers." We need order and truth to find peace. What our future looks like, I do not know. I do know that it is up to us to be part of making sure our nation runs with fairness and justice and truth. I started 2 years ago encouraging people to read a book by David Brooks, The Second Mountain. Because in that book, David Brooks says that we are so divided in our country that we need to come together on a regular basis. He said monthly basis, where we get together and talk with each other and begin to trust one another. People of difference need to eat and drink together, come to know one another, to develop trust in our communities, and to be able to talk with one another honestly. I think that's a practical thing that we could and should do when these COVID restrictions end, so that should be a priority for all of us and for the church. This is not an easy time, and no one has all the answers or easy answers, but we need to recognize the challenge. As Calvin saw, we live a life of divine drama, and it is up to the people of God in the midst of the labyrinth to listen for the call of God, to find our way forward, to figure out what is going on in the world, and to play our part in this divine drama, working to discern and to stand up for truth and social righteousness that can create a world of peace. May God bless us in our journey. Amen.
Thanks for watching our video. Make sure to subscribe to get the latest and greatest videos from the Old Stone Church. And if you feel blessed by our message, please go to theoldstonechurch.org and click to donate. God bless you today and forever. The Old Stone Church. We've been loving Christ and serving City since 1820.